now I have to switch screens a bit. Okay. Okay, now I have recording going on. Any other questions? Okay, good point. Yeah, well, the other recording was not working, so I will repeat if somebody says something. Thanks, Sveta. Okay, I have a question from Ennis. In code along, you used app.use express JSON. What does it do? Change format to JSON or read data as JSON? That's a tough question. I did not want to explain that too much because it's really not necessary to understand exactly how it works. So for you, all you need to know is that without it, you cannot get the body. So if you try to get the body without this line app.use, wait a second, guys, I'm getting overwhelmed. I have something on another screen and something on this screen. Let me open some node code here. Okay, there you go. Okay, here it is. So let me make that a bit bigger. So if it's blurry, it's still readable, I hope. Let's close that off. Let's close this off. Okay, so the question is about this line number 7, that says app.use express.json. And why do we need that? Well, the short answer is that if you do not have this line somewhere at the top of your file, and then inside one of your request handlers, you try to type request.body, this will give back undefined. Now, if you want to have the body, then you need to put this at the top, and then you will have, in the body parameter, you will have the body of the request. How exactly this works, we don't care. Somebody from Express, who is really smart, wrote it for us. All we need to do is put this at the top, and then we can just use request.body and then dot something dot name, for example, or something else. Okay. And another question, can we use body parser package? Body parser, it's a similar thing, but it's actually a bit different. Let me open it up, body parser npm. So this is the body parser. My internet is struggling a bit with the load. Hey, Comshon, man. Yeah, it's coming. It's coming. Yeah. Let me see. Body parser, body parser. So body parser is an npm package that you can install. It does not come in directly with Express, so you need to install it additionally. And it's very similar in that it takes the body of the request and puts it in a variable called request.body. But there is a big difference in that express.json understands JSON body, while body parser understands a different format, which is I think it's this one. So if I open Postman in the body, here I can select the type, and I have raw JSON right now. But there are different types how you can send data in a request. For example, you can send data as XML. Another way is with this form URL encoded. Yeah, and this is a completely different format, and this was used in the past more from the browser. So the browser would use this format when you have a form on a page, but this is really outdated and we don't use it that often anymore. So to get back to the question, body parser is very similar, but it parses a different format. So body parser parses this format, and express.json parses a different raw JSON format, which are two completely different formats. And in one of the homeworks, I think there is an exercise which uses body parser, so that you can see how that works. Let me give you an example here. Name, class 26. That's the body. There was a way actually to see how this looks like in code. No, how is this? Oh no. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, so this is kind of the format for this. It's very small. I don't think you can see that. Mm. Here, this is something how it looks like when it's being sent. So it has a different format. It's not JSON, it's some other format, which body parser understands. You don't have to remember this. So we have that the npm module, and you can use it if you have a form which is sending data to your server, which is not very common. Much more common is to use JSON. Okay, questions. Here are the topics that we covered in case they remind you of a question. Enis, can you be a bit more clear about your question? Because I'm not sure I understand what original JSON file you mean. Is this some exercise or the request, or what do you mean by that? And I would like other people also to ask questions. Can I change original JSON file? What do you mean by original? I don't know what do you mean by original. Is that you mean the request? This JSON? Can you change this JSON or something else? Yeah, I can hear you. Mm-hmm. Okay, okay. Yeah. Yeah. I understand the question now. Okay. Can I answer the question? Okay. Thank you. So Annie's question was about our exercise, which we did with the books, and I hope everybody did the. Sorry, this was a code along. This was not the exercise. The code along, and in the code along, I stored my data in this file called books.json. In this books.json, there is some data which was being stored, and I was manipulating this data. But and it's noticed, and I think a few of you noticed as well, that whenever you add books, this file was not updated automatically. And that is yes, that is the question. How can we manipulate this file? To do that, you need to work with the file system. And if you did the first exercise of the homework, I think there were some practice sessions there about the file system. Now we do not cover the file system anymore during the lectures because yeah, it just we have to focus on the server and the request and all the other things, so there is no time for the file system. But if you want to learn more, you can Google online how I can update a file, and there will be a lot of examples there. And I think in one of the homework for week 2, there is also a bit of working with the file system. So Node, unlike JavaScript in the browser, has access to the file system. It can open files, read files, edit files, delete files, and all these things. Uh, and I'm not going to go into detail how you can do that, but if you're interested, just Google for that and you'll find some examples. But that is not part of the lecture. In the future, in the next course, you will learn about databases, and then you will learn how data can be stored and updated through the database, because that is how applications work. So applications use a database. They do not like put like things like this in a file. This is just for the exercise. Okay. Next question. I had the question from Anis, Zain, and Mukahit. Who has not asked a question? Not there. I want to hear at least one question from everyone. Another. And who is? And Abed. Abed, I did not hear a question from you either. Either type the question in the chat or Slack it to me if you are ashamed of putting it in the chat, or open your mic and just ask. Good morning. Okay, small example of REST. Oh, that's gonna be hard. Uh, okay, let me think about that. Thank you for the question. So the question is, this was Abed. Yeah, Abed asks, says that he has a bit of trouble understanding REST, and he would like me to give a small example for REST. So REST, I will just quickly recap here from the lecture. REST stands for a representational state. Where is my browser has disappeared, guys? Ah, there it goes. REST stands for representational state transfer, but that tells you almost nothing, I think. So how to explain this? It's really tough. So that's why we spent almost the entire lecture gradually explaining this. So now it's hard for me to summarize it in 5 minutes. What you need to maybe understand, it's really important to understand why did people bother to come up with REST? Like why are we learning about this? Why is it important? What's the whole point? I mean, we have HTTP, right? HTTP, we can talk to the server and the browser, so it's all fine. Why do we need this REST? It feels a bit, why on earth? I will just build the Yeah, exactly. What's the difference between a normal API and a RESTful API? So why did people just not write APIs and why did they bother with REST? And the answer to that is if everybody goes ahead and writes their own API in the way that they think about it, then all of a sudden you have the whole internet, everybody has writing APIs slightly differently. Now, just imagine the same with code, right? When you write code, you kind of write functions and you have a similar structure. All of us is following that structure. If you have a callback, there is a certain way how you write the callback. It's always the last argument and all kinds of norms like that arise in programming. And the rest is just another norm. So it's just a good way how all programmers agreed, okay, this is how we're going to write APIs so that other developers also can kind of understand the way it's written and how to call it. So if I tell you, hey, this is an API, and if I tell you it's a REST API, then you can already imagine that there is a resource, there is probably a get and a post request, there is a delete request if I want to delete something, and so forth. If I just tell you there is an API and it's not a REST API, then you have no idea how it is structured, how it is organized, and then you need to spend hours reading the documentation to figure it out. So it's just a matter of putting some standard or framework about how to write APIs. I hope that answers why we need REST APIs and why people bother to come up with them. And why normal API? That's so hard. Like normal API. Like in a normal API, I can give you some examples that I have come across. For example, in a normal API, I have seen APIs that look like this. For example, example.com. This is a path in the API. So you send a get request at example.com create user, and then name is Andre. Uh, Now this is I'm sending you in the chat. Maybe I should put it here so that everybody can see it. Yeah. And then it's part of the recording as well. Yeah, let me do that. So imagine I have this path. HTTP, of course, at the beginning. Yeah. Now this is a valid API, right? I have my host here. This is my path, and this is a parameter that I have, right? But how do I know that there is something called create user? And then somebody else is writing a similar API, and almost every API there on the world will have something about users, right? So, and then somebody out there decides, you know what? I also need to create users, but I'm gonna do it slightly differently, and I'm gonna call it, I don't know, new user. Yeah, why not? They can. And then actually, Well, I'm gonna assume that the first thing after the slash is the name, you know. And yeah, this is also a valid API call. It can exist, but uh, like it makes no sense. If I'm trying to write a code that is using this and this API, I need to read and figure out all the paths and how to pass the parameters, and which method I need to use everywhere. So it's a lot of effort to figure out how to use an API. And keep in mind, when you're writing your own application, you're gonna use 10, 20 APIs in it, because nowadays we use APIs for all kinds of things. So we use APIs for location, for payments, for all kinds of things. We use an API. And if you have for every API to learn the structure, how the path is, how to pass the parameters, you're gonna go insane. And when you have REST, then you know it's going to be post HTTP. If I want to create, then it's always post. I don't have to think about it. And then I know here it's not create or new or anything. I know it's just users, probably, or user. Yeah, that's the only thing I need to check if it's plural or singular. And then I know that the content goes in the body and then it's JSON, and I just need to check what is allowed, and I can probably guess that name is in there. I hope that answers the question. So this is normal API. I'm gonna call it normal. And this is the REST API. So the difference is only that in the REST API, when you have the path, there are no verbs in the path. There are only nouns, and the nouns correspond to the resources that you're working on. For example, user. Yeah? And the verb is in the HTTP method. So post tells me create. And if it's a put, then it's an update. If it's a get, I'm reading data. If it's delete, then I'm deleting data. So there is no reason to put delete or update here in the path. And the data is always passed through the body. And if I want a specific user, then I do put http example.com users, and I always put something like this, right? This gives me a specific user. And these are just some kind of way how we all agree that this is how we're going to write APIs, so that everybody follows the same way, so that we can easily use call APIs from other people without having to remember how their paths are constructed. And okay, that was also a question from another. Okay, uh, we have someone else joined in the meantime, or somebody changed their name. I see someone called Lokman in the chat. If there are any new questions, guys, type them in the chat or open your mic. Oh, somebody's trying to speak, but it's very, very far away, I think. Can you try again now? Hi. Okay, I can hear you now. Hmm. Yeah, it's not saved. Yeah. Okay, I already answered that question. But no, never mind. I will quickly repeat that. So the Zain or Zane is Zane. I will repeat the question for everyone because your audio is not part of the recording. So Zane is asking about the code along. So in the code along, we build a library API, and we had a file where we stored some books, right, as JSON. And is asking why, when we create a book with the API, it is not stored in the file. Well, the short answer is because we never wrote that in the code. So if you want the books to update, then you have to write some code to make this file update. Now, I didn't do that because that would have been a lot of code extra, and also I wanted to focus on the requests and the handling and the URLs, and I didn't want to now go into files. It's a good exercise for you at home if you want to try it and write this code. It's not too complicated. It can be done. We just didn't do it to focus on the other things. You're absolutely right. In the real world, what we wrote doesn't make a lot of sense because as soon as the server is restarted, the data is gone, and that's not what you want. So you always need to store the data on disk, and in this case, it was going to a file. But in reality, uh, real web applications store their data in a database. So we do not store data in files. So that's why I also don't think it's very useful to learn how to store the data in file, because you're not going to do that when you go to work somewhere. You're always going to use the database. But if you want to look up how to work with the file system, that can be useful. You can create files, write to files, delete files. So you can do all of that with Node, because Node is not running in the browser and actually has access to the file system. You probably know that from the browser you have no access to the file system. You cannot open files or anything like that, because that is considered a security risk. Because otherwise every website can just read all my files, which is not something I want. Okay, Lokman apologized for the delay. Maybe I can have a question from them. And that would be great. And I see now also Karam joined. I don't know how long ago. Karam, if you have any questions, put them in the chat or open your mic. Or anyone else. I mean, I'm naming people here, but if you have questions, go ahead. Whoa, 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 whoa. Ennis, data.find. Can you explain data.find? Yeah. To find duplicated item. Okay, so I guess Ennis is asking about this line of code, which is using the array function find to find an element in an array. Now it's a bit confusing maybe because data is all kinds of things. So let me make a simpler example for you guys. Maybe I can do this in the browser so that we can execute it on the spot. So let books do like this, right? And we have ID1. I'm gonna make it easy and name, not go crazy here. Name. Okay, they don't have to be real books. I'm just gonna put in some nonsense here. So we have one book and we have another book. These are not real books, guys. Don't go and look them in the library. They do not exist. Okay. I have an array of books. Well, let's make it 3 actually. ID. And now I'm writing the IDs 1, 2, 3, but they don't have to be in order. So I'm gonna mix them up a bit so that they're not in order. Foo. Yeah, so they could be like this somehow. I don't know. The IDs come from somewhere. Now I have in the request, I have request ID, right? And this says 2, for example. This is what I have in the code. I have somebody is asking me for a book which has an ID 2, and I have an array of books, and I need to find whichever book it is that has an ID 2 and print out the name, which would be this thing called ipsum here. Now there are many ways how you can do this. You can write a for loop, but that's a bit long. We can write a for loop. Let book that I am looking for. You could start like this. So at the beginning you don't know which book it is. Then you go with the for loop, iterate over the array, and I guess for now this should be like, no brainer for you. I have a loop. I just wrote a for loop. I don't have to explain this. Now if books of I.id is a request ID, right? So I'm iterating over the array, taking the ith element or whatever element I'm iterating, looking at right now, and then check if the ID of that element is equal to the ID of the one that I'm looking for. And if it is, then I'm gonna put that book in this variable so that I can use this variable outside of my loop. Or I could also log it here if you like. Console.log books from I. Another bracket. Let's get rid of this. This is confusing. All right. Does this make sense? So we have a for loop over the entire array. And then for each book, we are checking if the ID is equal to the request ID. If I run this, there it is. Book number 2, name is ipsum. Is this clear for everyone? Please type a 1 in the chat if this is clear. If not, we have a problem. Okay, good. Yeah, this is one way to write it, but it's a bit long. It takes like 3 or 4 lines, and we are logging it. And if you want to put this in a variable, yeah, you need to play around with it. One easy way to put this in a variable, I think the easiest one, is to make this a function. Find book with ID. Copy this code, and then instead of console.log, I'm gonna put a return here. And then find book with ID. Right? Because in the function I can use return. So this is an easy way to put the bloody thing into a variable. There now I have a variable that I can do something with the variable, right? Because that's what we wanted to do. You want to maybe change the name. Is bar now. Yeah, and if you look at the array, the good thing is it's actually now should be updated in the array as well. Yeah, it's updated also in the array. Because it's an object, and when you change an object, it's changed everywhere, even if it's part of some other array. Now, a bit shorter way to write this whole thing instead of putting it in a function and blah blah blah. And here I don't have parameters, so you need to also have parameters. So it's really a lot of code. A much easier way is to use find. So I have books dot find. Find is an array function which takes in a single parameter, which is again a function, which for every element of the array, which we're gonna call book, and I can use the arrow notation, or I can use the long notation, doesn't matter. Returns true if a condition is satisfied. So if book.id equals to request ID, then return true. Okay, let me put this in multiple lines so that it's a bit clearer here what's going on. Else return false. And another bracket. And oh, that's great. From it already executed and got me the response here. So this is how you do it using find. You have a function which takes in a single book, and the function find makes sure that this will go through all the books. Then you return true if a condition is met. And what find does is the first book in the array where this condition is true, it will give back that book, basically. Now what I did, I wrote this a bit shorter. First of all, I used arrow functions. And when you use arrow functions, you don't need this function keyword here. You can do this. Then if you have only one parameter, you don't need the brackets around it, so you can do this. It still works. And then finally, if I have a condition and then I return true, else return false, that's a really stupid condition, then I can just return this directly. And I don't need because this is already a Boolean expression which is either true or false. So I don't need to check it. I can just return that Boolean. And finally, what I did is if I have a return function, then I can get rid of these brackets as well, because if I don't have brackets, then this expression is immediately returned. And now it looks very nice, elegant, clean, and readable. It takes a bit to get used to this, but once you get used to it, you'll see how easy it is to read this compared to this for loop. For me to read this for loop, it will take me a few seconds to figure out what's going on here. But here, it's like almost instantly I can see what's happening. I hope that answered the question. Okay, we've been at this for almost 1 hour. I think that's enough time. I think everybody asked at least one question. Yeah, if you have more questions, you can type them in the chat, and we can have another session if there are a lot of questions. Please do the exercises from the lecture before you try to do the homework, because it's really important. And yeah, before we go, I just want to thank you for submitting the homework on time. And I'm really happy to see that everybody did very good on the homework. So I don't think I had to put even a single comment, which makes me really happy. So I hope you're having fun with the homework, and that it's yeah, it shows that you guys are learning hard. So I'm really happy for that. Okay, guys, have a nice rest of the day, and talk to you in 2 weeks. Bye, everyone.